The 15-minute habit that made Kenyon's faith unshakable. The book of Joshua, chapter 1, verse 8, says this, "This book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night, that thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then thou shalt have good success." That is the whole instruction right there. Not a glance at a verse before bed, but a mind soaked day and night. And Kenyon would stop you right there and say, "Do you see it? The good success never comes from believing hard for 5 seconds in a crisis. It comes from a mind already saturated long before the crisis ever shows up." Most people try to build their faith the moment trouble arrives at the door, and that is exactly why it collapses under the weight. Faith built in the fire is faith built too late. The habit has to come first. The crisis only reveals what the habit already built. Here is what I want you to say with me. 3 simple lines about what you are actually going to do starting this week. Not someday, not when life calms down, now. Say it with me. I give 15 minutes to the Word every day. I let it grow louder than my circumstances. I am building a faith that cannot be shaken. Again, I give 15 minutes to the Word every day. I let it grow louder than my circumstances. I am building a faith that cannot be shaken. Stay close, so tomorrow's 15 minutes finds you again. Subscribe now, so this teaching keeps reaching you. If something in you just went quiet while you said those words, good. That quiet is the part of you this whole teaching is for. Type the words, "I'm ready" in the comments right now. Let it be your seal on what we are about to build. The first law is that 15 minutes is a door and not a destination. People hear 15 minutes and think small. They think it cannot possibly matter against a whole day of bills and traffic and bad news. But Kenyon taught that it is not the length of time that changes a life. It is the direction the mind travels in that time. 15 minutes spent actually meditating in the Word, turning it over, letting it sink past the ears into the inner man, does more than 2 hours spent skimming it for information. Think of a man who reads the newspaper for 2 hours and forgets it by lunch, next to a man who reads 1 paragraph of something true and carries it all day. It is not the quantity of ink that moves a life. It is the quality of attention. Let me give you a picture of this. Imagine a woman named Carol who decides she wants this unshakable faith. Kenyon describes, so she sets aside an entire hour every Sunday afternoon. She reads 3 chapters. She feels productive. She closes the book satisfied. But by Wednesday morning, when her son calls with bad news, she notices something strange. None of it is there when she reaches for it. The hour is gone, spent but not planted. Now imagine a second version of Carol. She gives herself only 15 minutes each morning. But in those 15 minutes, she stops on 1 line. She says it slowly. She lets it sit in her chest before she moves on with her day. By Wednesday, when the same bad news call comes, that 1 line rises up in her almost on its own. She did not schedule more time than the first Carol. She gave less time, and it did more. This is the part most people get backwards. They think faith is a math problem. More hours must equal more strength. But Kenyon would stop you right there and say, "Do you see it? A mind can sit with the Word for an hour and never actually meditate at all, and a mind can sit with it for 15 minutes and be genuinely changed by evening." The door is small on purpose. It was never meant to impress anyone with its size. It was meant to be walked through daily without excuse. A door you can walk through every single morning without fail will always outperform a mansion you visit once a month. So this week, do not measure the habit by the clock on the wall. Measure it by whether the words actually got inside you before you stood up and moved on with your day. That is the whole test. That is the whole door. And once you understand the door is meant to be small enough that nothing can stop you from walking through it, you are ready to see why it has to happen at the same hour every single day. The second law is that the habit must be scheduled, not squeezed in. Kenyon lived by a structured devotional rhythm because he understood that faith is not built by inspiration. It is built by repetition at a fixed hour. Think about brushing your teeth. You do not wait to feel inspired to brush your teeth. You do it because it is simply the hour for it. And that unglamorous consistency is exactly what keeps your teeth intact for decades. Faith works the same way. If you wait until you feel like meditating in the Word, you will meditate maybe twice a month. And twice a month cannot carry you through a diagnosis or a layoff or a broken relationship. But if you have already decided, this is my hour, 7 in the morning before the phone turns on, or 10 at night after the house goes quiet, then the habit does not depend on your mood. It depends on the clock, and the clock does not care how you feel. Let me tell you about a woman I will call Rachel. She worked 2 jobs, raised a son alone, and for years she told herself she would get to the Word whenever the day settled down. But the day never settled down. There was always one more load of laundry, one more bill to sort, one more fire to put out. And so months went by where her only contact with anything true was whatever she half remembered from years ago. Then one week she made a decision that had nothing to do with feeling ready. She picked 6:15 in the morning, before her son woke, before her phone lit up, and she simply sat with the Word at that exact hour, whether she felt like it or not. Some mornings she was so tired she barely remembered what she read. Other mornings her mind wandered to the bills the whole time. But the hour held even when her attention did not. And that is the part most people miss. The schedule is not asking for your best attention every single day. It is asking for your presence at the same hour every single day. And presence repeated becomes attention eventually. Picture 2 people facing the exact same bad news on the exact same Tuesday. One of them has fed on the Word every morning for a year without missing. The other only opens it when things feel heavy. The first one has a reservoir already filled. The second one is standing at the edge of a dry well, trying to dig during a drought. The schedule is what fills the reservoir long before the drought ever comes. And here is the part Kenyon understood that most people resist. Waiting for the right feeling to start a habit is how habits die before they are ever born. Feelings are unreliable weather. They shift with sleep and hunger and how your morning commute went, but a fixed hour does not care about weather. It simply arrives. So pick your hour today, not next week. Today, write it down somewhere you will actually see it. Tape it to the mirror. Set the alarm with a name that will make you smile, because a habit without a fixed hour is just a good intention wearing a disguise. And once the hour is locked in, the next question is what you actually do inside that hour. Because sitting in silence is not what built Kenyon's unshakable faith. Something louder was happening. The third law is that the words have to be spoken out loud, not just read with the eyes. Kenyon taught heavily on confession, the idea that there is a real and measurable difference between silently agreeing with a truth in your head and actually hearing your own voice declare it in the air. Think about an athlete before a big game. He does not simply think the words "I have trained for this." He says it out loud in the mirror. He says it to his teammates. He says it again under his breath walking onto the field. There is something that happens inside a human being when their own ears hear their own mouth declare a thing. It stops being a private hope and becomes a public decision, even if the only one listening is you, standing alone in your kitchen. Let me give you an ordinary picture of this. Imagine a man who lost his job 3 months ago. Every night he lies in bed and silently thinks the thought, "I will be fine. I will find something." And every morning he wakes up just as afraid as the night before, because a thought whispered inward never had to survive contact with his own hearing. Now imagine that same man standing at his counter with his coffee, saying out loud, "I am provided for. I am not forgotten." Watch how differently that sentence lands when his own ears catch it, his own voice hears it, his own chest feels it leave his mouth. Kenyon called this bringing the word from the head down into the heart through the mouth, and it is not mystical, it is simply how a human being is built. Silent reading stays a thought that can be argued with in the same silence it was born in. Spoken words become a stance that the rest of you has to answer to. Think about how differently we treat a promise we only think compared to a promise we say out loud to another person. The spoken one carries weight. The silent one never did. This is why Kenyon did not tell people to simply read their Bible more. He told them to speak it, to say it to the walls if no one else was in the room. So this week, when you sit with the Word for your 15 minutes, do not just scan the page with your eyes, the way you scan a grocery receipt. Speak it. Read it out loud even if you feel foolish doing it alone, even if your voice sounds strange in an empty kitchen, because it is not about how it sounds to anyone else. It is about training your own voice to say true things long before any crisis ever demands that you believe them under pressure. And once your mouth is speaking it daily, something deeper starts happening that has nothing to do with willpower at all. The fourth law is that the habit is not training you to ignore reality. It is training your inner man to outweigh it. This is where Kenyon's teaching gets deep, so let us take it in pieces, slowly, because if you rush this one, you will miss the whole engine underneath the habit. First, consider what he called sense knowledge. That is everything you learn through your 5 senses. What the doctor says, what the bank statement says, what your eyes see scrolling through the news at 11 at night. Sense knowledge is real. Kenyon never once denied that. The pain in your body is real. The number on the bill is real. The silence from someone who used to call every day is real. Nobody is asking you to pretend the facts are not the facts. Second, consider what he called revelation knowledge, that is, truth that does not arrive through circumstance at all. It arrives through the Word taking root in the inner man, quietly, morning after morning, until it becomes something you know the way, you know your own name. And here is the piece almost everyone misses on their first pass through this teaching. Kenyon taught that these two kinds of knowledge are not peaceful roommates sharing space inside you. They are in a constant, ongoing contest for which one gets to speak the loudest when pressure finally arrives, and whichever one has been fed the most consistently in the quiet months before that, pressure is the one that wins. Third, consider that this is not mysticism. It is simple math, almost embarrassingly simple. If you feed sense knowledge 14 hours a day through worry and comparison and doom scrolling, and you feed revelation knowledge 0 minutes a day, sense knowledge will win every single time, without even having to fight for it. But if you feed revelation knowledge 15 focused minutes daily, something strange starts happening. That 15 minutes, small as it looks on a clock, begins to outweigh circumstances that are 10 times louder and 10 times more visible. Fourth, let me walk you through this with someone ordinary, a woman I will call Denise. She works in billing at a clinic, steady job, nothing dramatic about her life. One Thursday she opens her mailbox and finds a letter from the mortgage company. The wording is careful and polite, but underneath the politeness is a warning about missed payments. She stands in her driveway reading it twice, and by the time she walks back inside, that single letter has already taken over the whole evening. It sits on her kitchen counter, and she finds herself glancing at it every time she walks past. It is louder than the dinner she is cooking, louder than her daughter talking to her about school, louder than the television she turns on just to drown it out. By Friday morning, she has not slept properly And the letter has not even changed. It is the exact same piece of paper it was on Thursday, but it has grown in her mind until it fills the whole house. Now imagine a second version of Denise. Same job, same letter, same Thursday. But this Denise has spent the last year giving 15 minutes every morning to feeding something other than sense knowledge. When she opens that same mailbox and reads that same careful, polite warning, something different happens. The facts do not change. The number on the page is identical. Her stomach still tightens. She is still human, but there is already something inside her heavier than that letter. Something that has been building quietly for months before this Thursday ever arrived. So instead of the letter running the whole evening, she sets it down. She still has to make a phone call Monday morning. She still has to face a real conversation about a real shortfall. Nothing about the outer situation is easier for her than it is for the first Denise. But she sleeps that night. And she is still able to sit with her daughter and actually hear what happened at school. The difference between these two women was never the letter. The letter was identical. The difference was entirely what each of them had been feeding in the months leading up to that Thursday 5th. Picture this as an actual scale. One side holds the facts, the diagnosis, the bill, the silence, the rejection. And Kenyon was never asking you to pretend that side of the scale is empty. It is not empty. It has real weight sitting on it. What he taught instead is that the other side of the scale is not fixed. It is not a given amount you were simply born with. It grows or shrinks depending entirely on what you place on it daily. 15 minutes of truth spoken and meditated on is a small weight placed on that side every single morning. And small weights, placed daily without fail, eventually tip a scale that looked impossible to move. Sixth, consider why this matters for you specifically. Right now, tonight, you likely have at least one thing sitting on your own counter, the way that letter sat on Denise's. A diagnosis, a debt, a relationship gone quiet, a job that no longer feels stable underneath you. The habit is not going to make that thing vanish on command. It will not rewrite the letter. It will not change the test result. It will not make the phone ring the way you want it to. What it does instead is far more useful than a disappearing act. It builds a weight inside you heavier than that thing, so that when you stand next to it, you are not the one trembling. The letter stays a letter, but you are no longer the same person reading it. So this week, when a fact tries to shout at you from the kitchen counter, do not argue with the fact. Do not pretend it away. Simply ask yourself one plain question. What have I fed today? Because that single question, asked daily, honestly, is the entire difference between a faith that shakes at every letter in the mailbox and a faith that does not. And this is exactly the law that explains why the habit has to be daily and never occasional. Because the inner man is only ever as heavy as what you have poured into it recently. Stop feeding it for 2 weeks and it grows light again. Keep feeding it and it becomes something the facts simply cannot move. I do not deny the facts. I outweigh them. Stay close so tomorrow's 15 minutes finds you again. Subscribe now so this teaching keeps reaching you. The fifth law is that repetition is what turns knowledge into reflex. Think about your own phone number. You did not memorize it by reading it once. You memorized it by saying it and writing it and hearing it over and over until it stopped being information and became instinct. Faith works the same way. Kenyon did not meditate on 100 new verses a week. He returned to the same core truths again and again until they stopped being sentences he read and became things he simply knew the way he knew his own name. Think about a man learning to drive a stick shift. The first week his hands and feet fumble every single time. He has to think through each motion, clutch, shift, release. and it feels slow and clumsy and nowhere close to natural. But he does not switch to a new car every day hoping a different lesson will suddenly make it click. He drives the same motions on the same car again and again, until one day, months later, he is shifting gears while carrying on a conversation, never once thinking about his hands. That is not talent. That is repetition, quietly turning effort into reflex. Faith grows the exact same unglamorous way. Most people treat their morning time with the Word the way a nervous student treats a textbook the night before an exam, flipping pages, hunting for something new, hoping one fresh insight will finally be the one that saves them. But Kenyon was not hunting for novelty. He was drilling depth. He picked truths that mattered, and he returned to them like a man returning to the same well every morning, drawing the same water until his whole household simply expected it. Pause for a moment and pick one real verse or one real truth you want to become instinct in you. Not 10, 1, and this week, return to that same one daily, instead of hunting for something new every morning, because 100 verses skimmed once will fade by Friday, but one truth repeated daily becomes something you cannot lose, even under pressure. Notice what did not happen in either story. The driver did not need a new car, and you do not need a new verse every morning. What both of you need is the same simple truth, worn smooth by repetition until it stops being something you recall and becomes something you simply are. That single truth, repeated until it is reflex, becomes the seed for something much bigger. The sixth law is that the 15 minutes is meant to leak into the other 23 hours, not stay locked inside its own little box. Most people treat their morning time with the Word the way they treat a vitamin. They swallow it quickly, they check the box, and then they assume its work is finished the moment they close the book and move on with their day. But Kenyon never taught it that way. He treated those minutes the way you would treat a drop of dye dropped into a glass of clear water. You do not need the whole glass to turn color instantly. You only need the drop to sit still long enough for it to spread on its own, and it always spreads, given time, into every part of the glass it touches. That is the picture behind this law. The 15 minutes is the drop. Your day is the glass, and if you rush through the drop or skip it entirely, there is nothing left to spread once the pressure of the day arrives. Let me walk you through an ordinary day so you can actually see the mechanism working, instead of just hearing about it. 6 in the morning, before anything else touches your mind, you give 15 minutes to the Word, speaking it out loud, letting one truth settle in rather than rushing to finish. 7 in the morning, you are pouring coffee, and the news on your phone flashes something unsettling about the economy. And you notice, almost without deciding to, that you did not immediately spiral the way you used to. 8 in the morning, a message arrives that would normally spike your anxiety, but something in you seems to catch it a half second before it lands. 9 in the morning, a coworker mentions a rumor about layoffs in the break room, and instead of carrying that rumor around all day like a stone in your pocket, part of your mind quietly drifts back to the line you spoke at 6. 11 in the morning, you make a small mistake on a task, and your old habit would have been to spiral into self-criticism for an hour. But this morning, it passes through you in under a minute. Noon, you are tired and the day feels heavy. And without even trying, you catch yourself murmuring that same line under your breath while you eat lunch alone in your car. 2 in the afternoon, someone speaks to you sharply and unfairly, and you feel the sting. But underneath the sting, there is something steadier than usual holding your response. 4 in the afternoon, your energy dips and doubt creeps in about whether any of this is even working. And that very doubt becomes, without you planning it, something you quietly answer with the same line from 6 in the morning. 7 at night, you lie down and the worry that usually keeps you awake shows up right on schedule. But this time, it meets something inside you that has been fed all day long, and it simply cannot get the same grip it used to have. That is the whole picture of this law. The 15 minutes was never meant to stay contained in its own quiet corner of the morning. It was never a private ritual sealed off from the rest of your life, the way a vitamin is sealed inside its capsule. It is meant to be the seed that grows roots into every single hour that follows. And here is the part most people miss. You will rarely catch the leaking in the act. You will not usually notice in the moment that the 6 o'clock line is quietly steering the 2 o'clock reaction. It works underneath the surface, the way a root works underneath soil, unseen, unhurried, but undeniably present when you look back at the shape of your whole day. Kenyon did not build a private morning ritual disconnected from his life. He built a morning habit that quietly ran the rest of his day underneath the surface. So the real question this week is not simply, did you sit for 15 minutes? The real question is, did you notice the drop spreading later in the glass? Did the 6 o'clock line show up uninvited at noon? Did it show up again at 7 at night when you least expected it? Because if it did, the habit is already working exactly the way it is designed to work. And once you see that the habit keeps running quietly, even when you are no longer consciously thinking about it, you are ready for the deepest part of what this actually does to a person over time. The seventh law is the deepest one, and I want to walk through it slowly, because this is the actual engine underneath everything Kenyon taught. First, consider what he called the new creation. He taught that a person who has truly received this truth is not simply a sinner trying harder. They are, in his words, an entirely new kind of being, with a nature that did not exist before. This is not a small idea. Most people spend their whole lives trying to manage their fear by managing their circumstances. They try to control the outcome, control the diagnosis, control what other people think, control the bank account, and it never works for long, because circumstances are not the actual battlefield. They are only the weather, and no one has ever won a war by rearranging the weather. Second, consider that the real battlefield, according to Kenyon, is the identity a person quietly believes about themselves underneath all the noise. Here is a simple test. Notice what you say to yourself in the 2 seconds right after something goes wrong, before you compose yourself, before you say the polished thing out loud. What is the raw whisper underneath? For some people it is something like, "Of course this happened to me." For others it is something like, "I am always one mistake away from losing everything." That raw whisper is the actual foundation, and if that whisper secretly disagrees with the words you speak in your 15 minutes, then no amount of positive scripture reading will hold up under real pressure, because the words are fighting against a foundation that has already voted the other way. This is exactly why some people read the Bible their whole lives and still panic at every storm. They were reading true words on top of a foundation that never got renovated. Third, consider what the 15-minute habit is actually doing underneath the surface. It is not decoration. It is not a nice morning ritual to feel spiritual before the day starts. It is slow renovation, stone by stone. Every single day you speak the truth of who you actually are, according to the Word, and every single day that raw whisper gets a little quieter and the new voice gets a little stronger. This does not happen in one sitting. Kenyon did not wake up unshakable after one good morning. He built it the same way a river carves a canyon, not with force, not with one violent flood, but with the same water flowing over the same stone every single day for years. If you stood at that canyon on any single afternoon, you would see nothing happening. The stone would look exactly the same as it did the day before. And yet decades later there is a canyon deep enough to hold a whole river inside it. That is what 15 minutes a day is actually doing to the inside of a person. Even on the mornings it feels like nothing. Fourth, let me give you a picture of this that you can actually feel. Imagine two men, both around 40, both losing their job on the exact same Friday afternoon. The first man has spent years quietly measuring his worth by his title and his paycheck without ever noticing he was doing it. So when his manager calls him into that small office and says the position has been eliminated, something inside him does not just lose income, it loses its footing entirely. He drives home in silence, and when his wife asks how his day was, he cannot even get the words out, because underneath the job loss is a much older and much scarier question quietly surfacing. If I am not the provider, who am I? That question was always sitting under the floorboards of his identity. The layoff simply pulled the rug back and revealed it. The second man gets the exact same phone call, the exact same words, the exact same walk to his car in the same parking lot. But this man has spent 3 years feeding a different foundation every morning before the sun came up. So when he sits in his car afterward, the loss is still real. He still feels the sting of it. He is not pretending it does not hurt, but there is something steady underneath the sting that was not there for the first man. He drives home, and he is actually able to tell his wife the truth calmly. And together they start making a plan. That same evening, the paycheck disappeared in both stories. The circumstance was identical, and the only variable separating these two men was what foundation each of them had quietly been building, morning by morning, in all the ordinary months before that Friday ever arrived. Fifth, consider a second picture, because this is not only about money. Imagine a woman waiting on a phone call from a doctor's office about a test result. The waiting itself is the hard part. And in that waiting, whatever foundation she has built will surface without her even choosing it. If the whisper underneath her has always been something quietly built on fear of being fragile, the waiting becomes unbearable. Every notification on her phone becomes a small earthquake. But if she has spent months speaking a different truth about who she is every morning, the waiting does not disappear, the fear does not vanish completely. She is still human, but there is a floor underneath the fear that keeps her from falling all the way through it. She can still function, still show up for her family that afternoon, still breathe. That floor is not something she built in the waiting room. It is something she was quietly building for months before the phone ever rang. Sixth, consider why this took Kenyon years and not days. Because a foundation is not rebuilt by one dramatic burst of emotion at a church service or one good morning that felt powerful. It is rebuilt the boring way. The same way muscle is built, one unremarkable rep at a time. Some mornings you will speak the words and feel absolutely nothing. You will wonder if any of this is doing a single thing, and Kenyon would tell you that feeling is not the measure at all. Faithfulness is the measure. A man lifting weights does not feel his muscle growing on any single day either. He feels tired, sometimes sore, sometimes bored, and yet 18 months later the strength is simply undeniable to anyone who sees him. The renovation of your inner foundation works exactly the same quiet way. Seventh, consider what all of this means for whatever is currently shaking in your own life. If there is something right now that still makes your stomach drop, that is not proof you are weak or broken or somehow behind everyone else who seems to have it together. It simply means your foundation has not yet been renovated in that particular room of your life. That is not shame. That is information, and information is useful. It tells you exactly where to aim tomorrow morning's 15 minutes. So instead of being frustrated that you still feel fear about one specific thing, get curious about it instead. Ask yourself plainly, what is the truth that would replace this exact fear if I fed on it daily? And then feed on precisely that. Not everything at once, not 10 new truths, just that one. Because the unshakable faith Kenyon became known for was never one giant leap of emotion. It was a foundation rebuilt one ordinary, unremarkable morning at a time, quietly, patiently, stone by stone, until one day the storm came, and to his own surprise as much as anyone else's, he simply did not move. The eighth law is that the habit does not remove the storms. It changes what happens to you inside them. This is important because some people quietly believe that if their faith were strong enough, hard things would simply stop happening to them. That is not what Kenyon taught, and it is not what happened in his own life either. He faced real losses, real opposition, real seasons of difficulty. The 15-minute habit was never a shield that made trouble skip over his house. It was an anchor that kept him steady while the trouble passed through. Think about a ship in a harbor during a storm. The storm does not politely avoid that ship because it has a good anchor. The waves still crash. The wind still howls. The difference the anchor makes is not whether the storm comes. It is whether the ship ends up smashed against the rocks or still floating when the storm finally passes. That is the entire purpose of this habit. It is not a weather machine. It is an anchor. So if you build this habit and hard things still happen to you next month, that is not proof the habit failed. That is simply life continuing to be life. Let me tell you about a man who ran a small hardware store. He had fed on the Word every morning for 2 years, 15 minutes, same chair, same hour, nothing dramatic about it. Then one October his landlord doubled the rent without warning. The same week his best supplier went out of business. By any measure, that is a real storm. The shelves did not restock themselves, and the rent did not lower itself because he had a good habit. He still had to make calls, still had to lie awake doing math, still had to face 2 hard months of uncertainty. The habit did not wave a wand over any of that. But here is what he noticed. In the past, a blow like that would have sent him into weeks of dread that bled into his marriage and his sleep and his temper with his own kids. This time, the dread came, sat with him for an evening, and then something steadier rose underneath it. He still worked the problem with a clear head instead of a frantic one. He still made the hard calls, but his hands did not shake while he made them. Nothing about his circumstances changed on the surface. What changed was what happened to him on the inside while the circumstances were still very much happening. That is the whole distinction Kenyon was pointing to. The test of this habit is never whether storms stop arriving at your door. Storms are simply part of living in a body on this earth. The real test is what you find rising up in you the moment the wind picks up. Do you find yourself reaching immediately for panic the way you always have, or do you find, almost to your own surprise, some steady thing rising that was not there a year ago? That steady thing did not arrive overnight, and it is not a personality trait some people are lucky enough to be born with. It is the residue of every single 15-minute morning you did not skip, even the boring ones, even the ones where nothing seemed to happen, and you wondered if you were wasting your time. Each of those quiet, unremarkable mornings was tightening the rope on the anchor without you feeling a thing, so that when the real wave finally came, the rope simply held. This is also why consistency matters so much more than intensity. One dramatic, tearful morning of prayer during a crisis does not build the same anchor as 300 ordinary mornings strung together long before any crisis showed up. Kenyon's faith did not become unshakable because of one powerful mountaintop experience. It became unshakable because of thousands of small, unremarkable repetitions that most people would have considered far too small to matter. And that is precisely why the habit has to be laid down before the storm and not scrambled for during it. The ninth law is that eventually the habit stops feeling like a discipline and starts feeling like who you are. In the beginning, 15 minutes will feel like effort. Some mornings you will not want to do it. You will negotiate with yourself. You will hit snooze and tell yourself you will catch up tonight. You will wonder if it is even doing anything. That discomfort is completely normal, and it does not mean you are doing it wrong. Think about a man who takes up running. The first week his legs ache and his lungs burn, and every single run feels like a battle against his own body. He checks the clock every few minutes, wondering when it will finally get easier. But he keeps showing up anyway. And somewhere around week 6 or 8, without any dramatic morning where everything suddenly changes, he laces up his shoes and steps outside and realizes the resistance is simply gone. Running has quietly become something he does, not something he has to force himself to do. Faith grows the exact same way. Kenyon himself did not start Unshakable. Nobody does. He built this habit morning after ordinary morning, long before anyone ever called him unshakable. And here is the quiet promise underneath this whole habit. A seed planted daily does not stay a seed forever. At some point, without any dramatic announcement, without fireworks or a sudden feeling of arrival, you will simply notice that reaching for the word in the morning no longer feels like discipline. It feels like breathing. It feels like the most natural thing in your day, rather than the hardest. Picture the difference between forcing yourself to smile at a stranger and simply smiling, because that is who you have become. The outward action looks identical from the outside, but on the inside one is effort and the other is nature. That shift from effort to nature is the whole point of the 15 minutes. It was never meant to stay a chore you grit your teeth through for the rest of your life. It was meant to become simply who you are, so that when trouble comes, you are not reaching for a discipline you have to remember to practice. You are simply being the person 15 minutes a day quietly built. So if you are early in this, and it still feels hard, that is not failure. That is not a sign you are behind anyone else. That is simply the seed still underground, doing quiet work no one can see yet. Keep watering it, and let the ordinary morning do exactly what it was always going to do. Here is the whole picture. The first law says 15 minutes is a door and not a destination. The second law says the habit needs a fixed hour or it stays a good intention in disguise. The third law says spoken words become a stance while silent thoughts stay just an idea. The fourth law says it is not about ignoring the facts. It is about outweighing them with something heavier. The fifth law says one truth repeated daily beats 100 truths skimmed once. The sixth law says the 15 minutes was always meant to leak into all 23 hours around it. The seventh law says the real renovation is happening underneath, in the foundation of who you believe you are. The eighth law says the habit is an anchor, not a weather machine. It does not stop the storm. It keeps you steady inside it. And the ninth law says, one day, the discipline quietly becomes your nature. But really, all 9 of these were never 9 separate keys. They were 9 turns of one single key. And that key is simply this: what you feed daily becomes what stands under you when everything else moves. If you are ready to actually live this instead of just hearing about it, that is exactly what the daily practice was built for. It walks you through 15 minutes a day, structured the way Kenyon structured his own devotional life, so you are never guessing what to read or say next. It is available for a small one-time cost, with a full refund if it does not serve you. Link in the description below. Say it with me one more time. I give 15 minutes to the Word every day. I let it grow louder than my circumstances. I am building a faith that cannot be shaken, and that, quietly, patiently, 15 minutes at a time, is exactly the habit that made Kenyon's faith unshakable, and it is the same habit waiting for you tomorrow morning.